Good evening, and welcome back to the Poe Museum. Tonight, I'm going to show you the very place where young Edgar Allan Poe lay dreaming dreams no mortal ever dared dream before. His childhood bed. And that will be the subject of tonight's installment of the Curator's Crypt. Well, here it is. This is the bed that Poe used when he was a kid living with his foster parents, John and Frances Allan, here in Richmond. And the piece has a pretty good provenance. It's right on the end here. It says that it went from John Allan Poe's foster parent to Charles Ellis, who's Allan's business partner, to Elizabeth Thorogood Munford, his daughter, to Etta White Munford, her daughter, to A. Churchill Young, her great-nephew, who donated it not to the Poe Museum, but to the University of Virginia. This was actually for a while on display inside of Poe's dorm room at UVA. And that's started back in 1958. When they first started preserving Poe's dorm room, the idea was they wanted to make it sort of a mini Poe Museum. And fortunately, they didn't do that because it's not very well climate controlled in there. But for a while, this bed was there. And in the 70s, they were convinced maybe they should let the Poe Museum have the bed because it wasn't typical the kind of bed that they were using at UVA at that time. So they switched it out for the bed that you'll see in Poe's dorm room right now. Yeah, if you go to Poe's dorm room, there's a glass door. You can just look inside. There's a little button you can push. It plays a recording about Poe's life. So that's how this got to the museum here in Richmond. And it came with the coverlet here. This is a Virginia star pattern. So typical of the early 19th century when Poe was growing up. And the donors said that it actually was Poe's coverlet that he used when he was a kid. And that's possible, but the bed went through so many different owners over the years that it could have been his, could have been one of the later owners. But at least the family says that this was Poe's. Now, when the Poe Museum first got it, they put it on display upstairs in what we call the North Building now. And it was at the top of this rickety little staircase and this little room with a glass door over it. And it was in a recreation of Poe's childhood bedroom because the museum actually has the mantelpiece from Poe's childhood bedroom. So they're able to partially reconstruct that. But those rickety old stairs prevented a lot of people from being able to get up there to see it, and we thought it should be displayed where everybody has a chance to see it. So we took it downstairs, we took the bed apart, reassembled it back downstairs, and one thing we found underneath the covers was a pillow. It's right over here. So here it is. And according to our old session book, this is a pillow from the Allan house, but I don't think it was actually a pillow from Poe's bed. It might have been on a sofa or something. So we took this out to display this separately. And also, the mattress here is not original. This is a modern mattress underneath here. In Poe's day, you probably would have had a couple different mattresses, maybe a straw mattress on the bottom, and above that, maybe a horsehair. The Allans are pretty wealthy, so he could have had some kind of goose feather down pillows up here. And from what we do know about Poe's sleeping habits when he was an adult, was that he used to stack up his pillows, just stack them up till he's almost sitting up straight. One person visited his house and said, how can he sleep like that? And his mother-in-law said, well, he can't sleep without all those pillows stacked up like that. So maybe he was a snorer, maybe he had sleep apnea, maybe he needed a CPAP machine or one of those dental appliances, we don't know. But that's something people asked about. And another thing people ask about here is, why is the bed so small? And we often tell them it's because when Poe started out, he was a baby and gradually grew larger over time and filled the bed over the course of several years. But recently I decided, well, since so many people are asking this, I did measure the mattress, and it's 72 inches. It's 6 feet. When Poe was 18 and enlisted in the U.S. Army, he was 5 foot 8 inches tall, so 68 inches. So he would have had a spare 4 inches down here. So he could have fit in this bed as an adult even. It's not very wide, so he couldn't roll around very much without falling off the side. But that's kind of what we know about the bed. And there's also a good story about this bed. We're about Poe's childhood. One of his friends, John Hamilton Mackenzie, used to say that Poe's greatest fear growing up was if he's sleeping in his bed at night and he imagined that somebody out there in the darkness was watching him, that he could almost see their hand reaching out from the darkness. So he'd pull those covers up over his head so tight he could barely breathe, because all little kids know the boogeyman can't get you through the covers. It's like a force field. But then, as an adult, all grown up, one of Poe's greatest stories had a very similar theme. You might remember this one. It's about a little old man alone in his bed in a dark room when he hears a slight noise from across the room. He sits up in bed. He's terrified that somebody out there is watching him. Because although he cannot see his killer's face, he could sense death's long shadow enveloping him. And that unseen influence caused him to feel, although he neither saw nor heard the villain, but to feel the presence of his head within the room, watching him. And it doesn't go well for that old man. He ends up murdered, chopped into little pieces, and buried underneath the floorboard. You recognize that story? That one's the Telltale Heart. So Poe wrote that decades later. But imagine the nightmares Poe had in this bed, the phobias that he had right here, might have inspired horror stories he'd write years later. So maybe the dreams he dreamt right here produced some of the greatest works of horror literature the world has ever known. But what do you think? Do you think the nightmares Poe had in this bed inspired his great horror stories? Let us know down in the comments what you think. And if you'd like to help preserve precious Poe pieces, like Edgar Allan Poe's childhood bed, why not become a member or contribute to the Poe Museum at poemuseum.org, or become a patron at patreon.com/PoeMuseum. And until next time, thanks for joining us, and we'll leave you with more gratuitous footage of the Poe Museum cats doing Poe Museum cat stuff.